history isn't written in books. It's carved in dirt, forged in fire, and weighed on the scales of gold. And Kevin Beets has just done what no modern miner dared to dream. In a single season, the son of the Klondike kingpin has shattered every record in the Gold Rush Chronicles, ripping $75 million worth of gleaming treasure from the frozen Yukon ground. Forget Parker's epic runs. Forget Tony's empire. This is a new frontier, and Kevin now stands alone at the summit. The story plays out like legend. Machines screaming, crews pushing beyond human limits, and sluices choked with nuggets the size of fists. The Klondike hasn't seen numbers like this since the fever of 1898, when desperate men chased shadows of fortune. But this time, it isn't rumor, it's reality. As news breaks, banks freeze, rivals gasp, and whispers ignite. Has Kevin rewritten the destiny of the North? Is this the single richest haul in mining history, or just the beginning of a fortune too vast to measure? One thing is certain. The gold rush has been reborn, and its new king wears the Beets name. So before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Because what you're about to see isn't just mining, it's history unfolding before your eyes. Kevin Beets was never like the others. Where rival crews relied on instinct, experience, and raw force, Kevin retreated into the world of data. His nights stretched into dawn, hunched over glowing monitors filled with topographic scans, geological surveys, and AI-driven models. He wasn't searching for gold in the dirt. He was searching for gold in the math. To most, it looked obsessive, even strange. But in those tangled lines of data, Kevin saw something no one else could. A narrow corridor beneath the frozen earth, a vein so dense the numbers practically screamed at him. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't a hunch. It was a certainty, a digital prophecy hidden beneath the Klondike. When whispers of his map of probability leaked into town, the reaction was scornful. Old-timers laughed, calling it a video game, insisting no algorithm could outsmart permafrost and Yukon mud. You can't feed a computer a dream and expect gold to spill out, one rival sneered. But Kevin ignored the noise. He bet everything, time, money, reputation, on the conviction that math and machines would succeed where gut and gamble had failed. In Dawson City, a place where fortune is judged by the shine in a pan and the creak of a sluice, Kevin was suddenly branded either a visionary or a fool. But there was one voice louder than the rest. Tony Beets, Kevin's father, the legendary king of the Klondike, had carved an empire with grit, instinct, and sheer stubbornness. He dismissed Kevin's methods as dangerous, even reckless. The ground's unstable. Too much water. That patch is nothing but trouble, Tony barked, waving off the idea as if it were a child's fantasy. Yet beneath his rough dismissal, unease gnawed at him. Because what if Kevin succeeded? What if the son outshone the father, not with muscle, but with a mind sharp enough to turn equations into rivers of gold? The camp began to fracture under the weight of that possibility. Some crew members whispered their doubts, unsure whether to trust Tony's hard-won instincts or Kevin's cold, precise data. Others quietly marveled at the younger Beets' determination. For Kevin, it wasn't just about gold, it was about independence, about proving he was more than Tony's heir, more than a supporting character in someone else's legend. Two visions of mining clashed beneath the same sky, and for the first time in years, the Beets camp felt divided. Then, like fuel poured on fire, history came clawing its way back into the story. Local historians, drawn by Kevin's unusual claim, unearthed records of a long-forgotten 1910 mining syndicate. Their ledgers told a chilling tale, a strike so rich it was called a river of gold too rich to control, a discovery that promised untold wealth and ended in ruin. Bankruptcy, disappearance, a sudden collapse that swallowed men, machinery, and hope alike. The maps showed shafts that had caved in, leaving only whispers in the Yukon wind. Kevin's anomaly lay directly over that ground. The same scar in the earth that devoured a syndicate more than a century ago now sat beneath his excavators. Old-timers leaned in at bar tables, lowering their voices as they muttered that the syndicate salted their own ground, cursed by their own greed, and buried both men and treasure under permafrost. The parallels were too sharp to ignore. A century ago, gold too rich to survive human hands vanished into the mud. Now, Kevin stood ready to chase it again, with nothing but numbers and faith in the unseen. But where those men had pickaxes and blind luck, Kevin brought something the Klondike had never seen. His answer to the whispers wasn't denial, it was machinery, precise and relentless, built to face what legend called cursed. Heated hydraulic cannons tore into frozen walls, thawing earth that had resisted men for generations. Drone-guided excavators moved with uncanny precision, their paths traced not by superstition, but by algorithms Kevin had refined for months. Towering over it all was his custom-built wash plant, a gleaming monster fitted with vibration sensors and feedback loops designed to squeeze every last particle of gold from the dirt. Crew members could hardly believe it. Every load was logged, measured, and processed with mathematical efficiency. Kevin insisted on precision down to the decimal. No wasted fuel, no wasted motion. His operation didn't grunt and groan like the rest. It purred with mechanical elegance, as if the machines themselves were performing a symphony written in steel and data. To rivals, it looked absurd. A science fair, they sneered, mocking his reliance on computers and custom rigs. But as the ground began to yield, as frozen gravel surrendered its secrets faster than anyone thought possible, the sneers grew quiet. Kevin's unorthodox strategy was working, and the Yukon itself seemed to be bending to his equations. The first signs of what lay beneath appeared almost by accident. Cleanup mats pulled from the sluice boxes didn't just glimmer, they overflowed. The carpets were so packed with coarse nuggets they had to be scraped by hand, pried loose like barnacles clinging to steel. Workers gasped as gold chunks fused together in natural sheets spilled onto the cleanup tables, their weight heavy enough to rattle the pans. These weren't the fine dustings most crews prayed for. This was untouched treasure, raw and ancient, locked away for thousands of years until Kevin's machines unearthed it. Then came the tally. In an early cleanup, weeks before most crews would even have stable ground, Kevin announced over $5 million worth of gold. The numbers didn't seem real. Crews across Dawson dropped their pans, stopped their excavators, and stared in disbelief at the news racing across the valley. Never had so much been pulled so quickly. In a world where $1 million in a season was a victory, Kevin had multiplied it fivefold before the season had even settled in. The claim that began as a gamble of math and nerve had exploded into a revelation. Dawson buzzed with the news. At the gas stations, in the bars, on the radios, the talk was all the same. Kevin Beets had done what nobody thought possible. The whispers hardened into a storm, rolling downriver into every camp. For the first time in years, Parker Schnabel's dominance stood openly challenged. Kevin wasn't just competing. He was threatening to eclipse the golden boy of modern mining. Rival crews felt the ground shift under their boots. A new giant had risen in the Klondike. And then the storm took on a face. Parker Schnabel himself flew in, unable to ignore the reports any longer. He arrived expecting exaggeration, sure that Kevin's numbers were padded with hype. Cameras followed his chopper as it descended onto the claim, anticipation thick in the air. He walked the ground like a skeptic, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, ready to debunk the myth with a single look. But what he found stripped the doubt from his face. Sluice boxes overflowed with nuggets the size of fists, their gleam impossible to fake. Buckets lined with gold-laden concentrate clattered as crews moved them aside just to make space for more. Clean-up mats shimmered like molten metal, each one carrying the weight of a fortune. Parker stared, not at a trick or an illusion, but at a truth too big to deny. Kevin had done it. He had found something beyond even Parker's reach. For a moment, the Yukon seemed to hold its breath. Two titans stood on the same ground. One the prodigy who had defined a generation, the other the heir who had broken free of shadows and built something new. Their rivalry, once dismissed as youthful competition, had transformed into something historic. Cameras captured the look in Parker's eyes as pride and humility mixed into rare honesty. He turned to Kevin and admitted, almost reluctantly, "You've done what I never thought possible." The words rippled across the mining world like dynamite. Kevin wasn't just Tony's son anymore. He wasn't just the engineer tucked away in his machines. He was the man who had challenged the Golden Boy and forced him to admit defeat, if only in that moment. It wasn't bitterness, it was recognition. The passing of a torch between rivals destined to define their era. That image, two giants standing in the same cut, gold glittering at their feet, traveled faster than any ounce of pay dirt. Within days, the footage leapt from Yukon television crews to international networks, each replay framing it as more than a rivalry. It was legacy, pride, and the Yukon itself choosing its champions. And once the clip hit screens in Zurich, Dubai, and Shanghai, the story was no longer about two miners in Dawson. Private jets began to appear on the tiny airport runway, disgorging men in tailored suits and women with portfolios of contracts worth more than some mines' entire lifetimes of production. These weren't tourists or fortune hunters. They were gold buyers, sovereign fund representatives, and corporate emissaries offering sums so astronomical they felt unreal. Kevin's discovery had transcended the Klondike. It had become an international obsession. Helicopters buzzed overhead almost daily, some from media outlets desperate to capture aerial shots of the glittering cut. Others chartered by investors who circled like hawks. Cameramen craned over fences, hoping for glimpses of sluices running molten with yellow metal. Reporters badgered locals for rumors, offering money for inside information. In Dawson, hotel rooms filled with foreign voices, traders whispering figures that could destabilize entire markets if true. Economists went on record, warning that the sheer volume of gold Kevin was producing, if unleashed too quickly, could disrupt not just local Yukon pricing, but ripple through global commodity exchanges. For decades, the Yukon had been a boutique producer, its yields important but not decisive. Now one claim, one operation run by a young miner once dismissed as a dreamer, had the potential to shake the foundations of international markets. Governments quietly began taking notice. Whispers spread of international syndicates angling for a slice of Kevin's strike. Shadowy groups with histories of absorbing resources by any means necessary. In modern memory, no Yukon claim had ever become a flashpoint like this. Kevin's mine wasn't just about treasure anymore. It was leverage. It was power. And in the heart of that maelstrom stood a son and a father about to tear each other apart. The tension between Kevin and Tony, long simmering beneath the surface, boiled into open conflict. Tony demanded his share, pounding his fist and growling that without the Beets name, nobody would be paying attention. "You think the world cares about Kevin Beets?" he barked. "They care because you're my son. You're mining on my ground. You're using my machines. This is Beets gold." Kevin met him with an icy stare and shook his head. "No, Dad. This is my work, my vision, my numbers. I found it, I built it, and I won't let you claim it." The camp split overnight. Some of the older crew, men who had followed Tony through endless winters, who respected his grit and his curses, as much as his paychecks, stood firmly with the father. They called Kevin arrogant, ungrateful, too eager to erase the legacy built before him. Others, younger, and drawn to the precision of Kevin's methods, sided with the son. They believed in the equations, in the machines, in the proof shimmering across the cleanup tables. For the first time, the Beets empire fractured. Its camp turned into a battlefield of loyalties and egos. The fight wasn't just about money. For Tony, it was about pride, about refusing to be overshadowed by his own blood. For Kevin, it was about freedom, about carving his name into history without his father's shadow blotting out the sun. Gold had given them fortune, but now it threatened to take their family from them. Even as conflict tore at the Beets, stranger events began to unfold in the cut itself. Welders working on sluice boxes reported sparks behaving unnaturally when dusted with fine gold concentrate. One worker swore the particles glowed, flickering like embers under his torch. Rumors spread that the gold ignited like fire. At first, Kevin dismissed it as exaggeration, but the reports multiplied. Men working near the pay dirt began noticing odd flashes, sudden bursts of light in the gravel, as though the earth itself were alive with flame. Geologists offered technical explanations. The purity of the deposit was extraordinary, with trace elements rare enough to cause unusual reactions under heat. They argued it was science, not sorcery. But to the workers on the ground, it didn't matter. Superstitions bloomed like wildfire. This wasn't ordinary gold. It was volatile, dangerous, something alive beneath the Yukon frost. Paranormal theorists pounced on the reports. Blogs lit up with speculation, tying Kevin's claim to ancient First Nation stories of fire veins running beneath the land, veins that carried not just wealth, but power. Some claimed the 1910 syndicate had perished because they had disturbed those same veins, unleashing a force no man could contain. Others whispered that Kevin had awakened something buried and patient, something that had waited for a century to rise again. In the camp, men worked nervously, casting wary glances at the ground even as they shoveled fortune into buckets. For Kevin, the flames were nonsense, distractions from the numbers and the machines that had brought him this far. Yet even he couldn't ignore the way legends twined themselves into his strike, amplifying its weight. The myths turned every cleanup into an omen, every tally into something larger than math. And when the season closed, the numbers proved just as terrifying as the stories. Kevin Beets confirmed $75 million in recovered gold, an amount so staggering it didn't just break records, it annihilated them. Cleanups that once seemed miraculous became footnotes to a haul that eclipsed every modern miner combined. Parker's millions, Tony's lifetime of dredging, even the boldest tallies of the past, all looked like pocket change beside Kevin's strike. He had taken the Yukon's mythology and fused it with mathematics, and in doing so, built a fortune that rewrote the very scale of possibility. The headlines came one after another, each louder than the last. Newspapers across North America called him the engineer king of the Klondike. Financial journals compared his algorithms to Wall Street's high-frequency trading, calling his methods resource quantification on a frontier scale. Analysts grasping for historical parallels reached all the way back to 1898, when prospectors swarmed the Yukon in the Great Gold Rush. They declared Kevin's strike the closest thing to a once-in-a-century event, a modern echo of the original fever, except this time it was powered not by luck or desperation, but by calculation. On television, experts debated the consequences. Could a single miner destabilize global gold supply? What would happen if he kept producing at this pace? Kevin ignored the chatter, turning his gaze not to the headlines, but to the data. The anomaly that had first drawn him here, the corridor of density buried deep beneath frozen earth, still extended further down. His strike was not exhausted. It was not even halfway mapped. Quietly, almost to himself, he admitted this $75 million was just the beginning. But the deeper the gold piled up, the higher the cost became. The camp was no longer a sanctuary of machinery and calculation. It had become a fortress under siege. Security incidents multiplied at a pace no one could dismiss as coincidence. Fuel tanks were sabotaged, flames licking across the snow in the dead of night. Excavators were stripped for parts by unseen hands, bolts and hoses vanishing with surgical precision. A dredge pump burned mysteriously, the fire traced to accelerants poured with intention. Kevin's discovery had painted a target not just on his claim, but on every man and woman who worked it. Former crew members came forward, shaken, admitting they had been approached by shadowy figures, offering life-changing sums in exchange for coordinates, data, even buckets of concentrate. One confessed he had been offered $500,000, cash, just to smuggle a single cleanup mat out of the sluice plant. Kevin tightened security, bringing in guards, cameras, locked fences, but paranoia grew faster than the defenses. Every flicker of light in the tree line, every crunch of snow beyond the floodlights, every distant drone overhead, each was seen as the approach of thieves or worse. Isolation began to weigh on Kevin. Where once he worked among his crew as an engineer and leader, he now retreated into the numbers, poring over maps and readouts alone. Rivals no longer mocked him. They either feared him or wanted him destroyed. Some miners whispered openly that the camp was cursed. The parallels with the 1910 syndicate loomed larger by the day. They too had struck a river of gold too rich to control. They too had been torn apart by greed, disaster, and sabotage. Had Kevin inherited not just their ground, but their fate? The line between curse and conspiracy blurred until no one could separate them. Equipment failures were no longer shrugged off as bad luck. They were signs. A snapped cable was sabotage. A collapsed cut was vengeance. Some swore they had seen shapes in the smoke, shadows moving where no men stood. One worker quit mid-shift, insisting he felt hands pushing him toward the sluice. Another claimed to wake at night to the sound of picks striking rock underground, as though the syndicate's ghosts were still mining in the dark. Kevin dismissed it as fear, feeding on fear, but even he could not deny the atmosphere that hung over the claim. The gold had brought fortune, yes, but it had also brought something else, something darker, something that seemed determined to balance the scales. And yet, despite fire, sabotage, and whispers of the supernatural, the gold kept coming. When the season closed, experts declared it official. Kevin Beets' strike had permanently rewritten Yukon mining history. For decades, he had been viewed as Tony's son, an heir working under the shadow of the Klondike King. No longer. Kevin had become a legend in his own right, standing on numbers so vast they no longer seemed tethered to the dirt and ice of Dawson. Historians said his discovery would be studied for generations, debated in books and documentaries, alongside the original rush of 1898. Economists insisted its impact would ripple across markets for years, a pivot point in global gold supply. Miners, even his rivals, conceded that his methods had changed the game forever. The Yukon was no longer a place of picks and instinct. It was now a frontier of algorithms, of machines guided by data instead of hunches. But beneath the accolades, one truth lingered. The anomaly still stretched deeper. What Kevin had pulled, $75 million in gleaming yellow, was only the surface. No one knew how far the corridor ran, or what waited at its depths. That unanswered question turned his discovery from an ending into a beginning, a story that demanded continuation. For now, though, one fact stood beyond dispute. Kevin Beets was the man who had bent math, myth, and earth itself. He was the miner who turned equations into treasure, who transformed superstition into science, and who rewrote history with $75 million of Klondike gold.